Okay, so I've just started a recording stream. That's cool. Hi, my name is Gary Francis. We're doing a bit of a conversation tonight about portable gardening and vertical gardening. It's part of a series of gardening things that I've been doing. The first one was on wicking beds. Next week's will be on food storage. And I suppose the other thing, and if anyone wants those videos, they'll get saved and recorded and able to be shared the same as this one. We'll be able to as well. So feel free to ask me and we can just send them out to people. They will get stored in the mutual aid group of Canberra, but we don't want too many people joining that group who aren't from the area. So if you do want it and you're not part of the Canberra area, or you don't have aspirations to join Canberra Mutual Aid on an ongoing basis, please just send me a message and I'll send you out the recordings that you request. So tonight's on vertical gardening, and it's funny right? But we've got to start changing our thinking. So tonight's content's just going to be this slide that I'm going to show you now. It's very, very simple. It just helps to frame your mind. And then all I'm going to do is walk through a number of photographs in my backyard, which will probably bore my brother immensely, and he'll leave early. So let me just sort of frame it for you, right? We think of length normally, we think of width normally, and if you put your mind's eye into a garden there, like your community gardens or even your backyard, you can clearly see that that's pretty normal, right? And everything grows out of the soil from length and width, and up it goes, and we reap and harvest what we've grown. Vertical gardening also says we need to recognize the vertical height that's above the garden, or because you've consumed that land area there in garden, that there's all that wasted space in the vertical height above your garden that's worth considering. You've got to be a little bit careful with it sometimes, because you don't want to block all the shade and stuff off your garden. Can someone who's got their mic on please go on mute? Somebody's got the mic
sorry,
on.
it's probably me. Yep.
That's okay. That's it. Thanks. So vertical gardening, let's use the airspace above. Let's not just think length and width, right? Let's plan our garden out, or our growing space out, knowing that all that height above the garden can be used. And I also did this as well. If your garden was close to an edge of a wall, you could take advantage of the vertical height going downwards. Thinking three-dimensionally rather than just width and length is really important. And there's no end when you start going up with your thinking into 3 dimensions of what you can get away with. So that's the end of the little slide presentation, but I think it's just important to recognize that we need to think for vertical gardening in 3 dimensions, not just 2. Because often, obviously, all the gardens are on the ground. We go length and width, and happy days, that's my garden. I try and think about using vertical height. And obviously, that's the extent of this presentation, is to try and put your mind into that frame as well. So let me just close out on that, get rid of that, and start showing you some photos. There's only about, I don't know, probably 40 or 50 photos maximum. But I put them into order so we can talk about specific subjects. This was my backyard a while ago. I actually don't know when this photo was taken. I didn't look it up. But that was me just starting to grow one summer, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. And I started to do it because I was too frightened at that stage, or didn't want to commit the whole backyard to a permanent garden. It kind of didn't work out that way, as you'll see later in my photos. But I started growing in portable gardening ways, right? And I actually brought all of those containers from Kmart, believe it or not. I forget what I paid for them all. And obviously that was my first sort of garden at this level on my property. Now, okay, it's not very spectacular because, hey, you're showing us plants that are growing in pots. Well, for people who don't have a lot of space, or you're up in apartment blocks, or you've got a veranda outside, these containers are really, really good because you can move them around all over the place. I've got a little blue hand trolley at my place, and that's probably done about 50,000 kilometers around my property, moving these guys all over the place. So that's what I did in my first summer of portable gardening. And I progressed a little bit probably a bit of an understatement, that one now, when you'll see the later photos. But if you're in a tight space, and I'll show you some photos of those things in use in my property in different ways. If you're in a tight space or you don't have an area that you can actually grow on, then buying this size container is really good, because they aren't too heavy. You can still get under them with a hand trolley and move them around. Or if you're up on a veranda somewhere and you want, I don't know, put the clothes rack out or something like that, you can just spin the pots around and move them out of your way, and then put them back afterwards so they're back in the sun, perhaps. So I just wanted to sort of show you the very beginnings of where I started. And for Agnes and Alan, it looks a little different now, as you'll see in the photos. So I went from that to this. This was the next summer. I started spreading them out, and you'll see clearly that I've grabbed plastic wire mesh, plastic just to make it a little bit easier on the plants. And I got sophisticated this summer and got milk bottles, painted them all black, and used them for drip feeding. So I could fill up that container, and by drip feeding it down, it would last, I don't know, probably about half an hour during the day, 45 minutes. I don't use those anymore. Even with paint on them, the UV just breaks them down too fast. But I went, obviously, from portable gardening perspective, from a very tight space when I really didn't know what I was doing, and still don't, to spreading things out a little bit. And what you're seeing in there is predominantly peas, beans. That one looks like either a chili plant or a tomato, and the same, right? And you might think, okay, well, why would you do that? Well, at the moment, a single calorie of food on your plate tonight when you ate dinner, hopefully you have, costs the planet somewhere between 13 calories and 19 calories to get that 1 calorie to your plate. That is the madness of global trade. It's insanity. I can't, it just makes my heart retch when I think about it. So every calorie you can grow for yourself out of your own environment, regardless of where you are, the benefit for you is enormous, nutritional value and fresh food and everything else. But the planet, the benefit for the planet is just massive. It's huge if you can start to think about your world and seeing yourself doing this. Because there's virtually nothing that won't grow in these pots, which means you can use those 13 stories up off the ground and be growing, peas, beans, tomatoes, peppers, chilies, all manner of things, depending on the size of your veranda. And, go out, well, even just herbs, tall herbs that can take advantage of this vertical structure. And you're not taking up any more room than the diameter of one pot. So from a vertical perspective, okay, these aren't that impressive because it's just growing food in pots and everyone knows that's what we do. But when you start giving it structure to go tall, obviously those peas there I'm about 6 foot tall. So that growth of peas there is probably 7 or 8 feet up because I've given it that vertical support and something to grow on and be supported by. And yet it's still portable. I can pick it up and move it, and I can take with it. If I was going to do this again, I wouldn't use the milk bottles, but there was quite an advantage to this because slow dripping water soaks into the soil better than just sort of a hose spray and move on. Here's an idea for what you can do with these things. Sorry, someone got a question?
Oh, Gary, I was just going to ask, are you going to have question time?
Yeah. We'll just fire questions now. If you've got questions on what you're seeing now, please feel free.
How you do those fabulous frames within that little pot. Where do you get that frame from?
Well, that came from Bunnings. We just cut it up and then rolled it up into a diameter. That was the diameter of the pot. Jammed that into the pot and then filled it up with rocks and soil as you normally would. And to close the loop, all I've done is made hooks so that these things sort of unzip and re-zip up using hooks in the wire. So that plastic frame just came from Bunnings. It's they'd sell it as chicken fence or whatever, but I like the one that had the plastic on it just from the plant protection perspective. And I did this probably 5-6 years ago at this level, and then the plastic coating on that stuff's still good today. I've got some photos. I'll show you how.
Like a bucket size or smaller than a bucket?
No, those are bigger than buckets. Those are, how big are those, Alan? They're 20 litres? I think they're 20 litres or 25 litre bucket pails.
Yeah, 20 litre pails.
Yeah. The tradies aren't allowed to use it. Sorry, Al, go.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say that the tradies aren't actually, the retailers aren't allowed to sell these pots fill anymore because they're deemed to be unsafe because they're too heavy. So I found them in Kmart. And if you ask me what I paid, I honestly don't remember what I paid for them. It would have only been a few dollars each. So does that help, Beryl,
yes,
with your question?
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
So I formed them up roughly to the right diameter on the ground, cut them, I worked out the diameter of the pot, cut them in horizontally and just rolled them up and stuffed them in the pots.
If I may for that, Gary, if anyone knows someone who has a restaurant, quite often they get food quality ones.
Yeah.
That can be easily reused.
Yep.
Yeah.
And if you follow the wicking bed one that I did last week, each of these could actually be turned into a wicking bed as well. I didn't know about wicking beds when I did all of these, and I've got holes in the bottom, so I'm kind of committed unless I can be bothered to sealing up the holes. These are growing as conventional pots. But if you're up in a veranda and you didn't want to stain, like as a tenant or whatever, you didn't want to damage the veranda, I'd turn these into wicking bed, sand, water in the bottom and soil on top. It's just a smaller version. So if you didn't want the water running out of the bottom, then just turn them into wicking beds. Who knew? But let me show you how I use those now a little bit. These are more detailed photos, just showing you the same thing, basically. I'll put little taps on these hoses so that you can control the drip feed as well. You just pour out of the container and sort of, not being in use really quickly, especially in our heat. And, plants kind of thrive, right? So if you've got a reasonable sized veranda or anything else that's not traditional garden, well, it was fun that year because you could walk down the rows and pick fruit or pick the vegetables and things, literally surrounded by a vertical garden. Do they work on concrete? Yes, they do. That's where that plant grew, and it was tomatoes, and obviously I took it at winter. But on concrete path right up to against a brick wall where you wouldn't normally think about gardening, these pots and then that vertical aspect to them, I can grow. I could turn this whole path into just pot after pot after pot after pot and be turning all that area of my house into growing space as well. And there's a couple of photos of more of those, right? And obviously those are all dead and dried and gone, but just to give you an idea, you can grow food anywhere, literally anywhere. So that's the end of that pots, right? From a portable gardening perspective, if people are coming for portable gardening reasons, that's really my venture into portable gardening in this presentation. I'm going to put a lot of energy now into vertical gardening and what I've done with vertical space. But, and I apologize, I didn't try and overbake the portable side, but if you came for a bucket load of information about vertical gardening, I mean, you can go and buy, strawberry towers, you can go and do all those sort of things that are commercially made, cost you a fair bit of money. But from my perspective, these things, they work, and there's all the vertical support there, and it's portable. So from my perspective, these things here are quite a success. I got asked a question last week about my composting bins, and these are my composting bins, and this is how I rigged them up initially before I permanently mounted them. These are plastic blue barrels, as you can see. And for someone who's wanting to use vertical space, I've got some photos here to show you how I finally installed these. All you're doing with these drums, I bought them off a second-hand merchant. They were $20 each. Out with a drill bit and a jigsaw, cut a door, hinges, clasps so that when these things rotate to stir the compost, you don't lose it all to the ground. Timber bracing on the outside and the same piece of timber on the inside with a hole drilled through so that when these things get heavy, because they do, the plastic needs a lot of support. So I've supported those with timber on the inside and outside. And I don't think you can see any there. Oh, well, maybe there's some screw heads there you can see on there. I've mounted pieces of timber like a concrete mixer paddle in the inside of a concrete mixer, so that when you spin these, the soil and the compost and material that's breaking down hits those blades and is forcibly then turned over. But really cheap, right? And functional, clean and tidy. And yes, the compost's off the ground, and but I mean, bacteria in there goes fine. The worms in there just thrive because you're composting food, so they love it. But from a vertical space perspective, this is what I did with those. Right, I mounted them on top of each other so that rather than just a compost bin take up remember that first slide I showed you with the width and height, the length and width thing, thinking width and length, I would only end up with one compost bin there and one there, and I wouldn't have doubled my composting capability by thinking vertically.
Could I ask a question, Gary?
Yeah, sure, go.
You mentioned the worms did well in there. You had to introduce the worms, I take it.
Of course, yeah, but you just dig a bit of soil out of your garden, or put some hessian mat down, and the worms will they love it under those things. So, yeah, they are isolated off the ground, and you're not going to get natural influx, but I'm not going to get natural pests in here as much either. And as long as you keep, you open up that door and spray a bit of water around now and again to keep the stuff moist, the worms just go nuts as they would normally do in a compost bin. But the vertical height thing is what I want to show people, right? And obviously I've put in some great big metal poles in here and concreted them into the ground to take that. But it's worth it from where I stand, because I'll show you how much more I went vertical in my thinking just in this area of my garden alone. So yeah, it's a serious infrastructure. It takes a bit of labor to make this stuff happen. But I'm doubling and tripling my vertical space all the time.
Gary, why do you need so many compost bins?
I'll show you some photos, and the answer will be self-obvious to you. Just, I have a lot of garden. I need a lot of compost. Let's just say that. You'll see it in some of these photos coming up. But I compost everything. Green waste bins. They are a waste. They are green waste. You are wasting good green organic material by using those things. I compost everything, all my cuttings of all my trees, everything. I've got a mulcher, so it cuts things into like 25 mil length segments. It's, you wouldn't want to put your hand in there. It'll chomp anything. So I compost everything. I don't throw away hardly anything green waste at all. Only some big sticks now and again that I can't sort of cut up and reuse. But thinking vertically, not just length and width, right? I've doubled my composting capability straight away by just thinking about the space above these two and putting another two above. But wait, it gets better. There they are there, with one with the door open, obviously, and I've got that same plastic mesh mounted above them, because I deliberately put those poles in quite long to take use of the vertical height, or to take benefit of it. I'll just flip that photo. And now you'll start to see I've got these beans. I've got these berry plants now growing even over the top of those again. So not only did I double the space from those base compost bins by putting two more above as well, I also used the full height of the poles. And this photo was taken like 2 days ago. So I'm now growing even above the compost bins as well. And the berries that come off this particular plant, I don't even know what plant it is, but they're an amazing berry. They taste like a mulberry, and they're about the size of a mulberry, but it's a growing vine. From a vertical space perspective, right, I've consumed all of that vertical height across both of those compost bins, and the height was just there waiting to be used. I just had to think about how to use it. So for gardeners out there who want to maximize your space, which I have done extensively on my property, as you're about to see, thinking vertical has a tremendous benefit. You're just doubling and tripling your growing space all the time. There's there's that vine starting to take off there, and now it's loving it up there, and it's just taken over all of that rack over the top of those compost bins. And next summer we'll just be picking berries from everywhere from a vertical height perspective. And that gives you an idea of how much that plant is actually enjoying being above it. And it's just by taking advantage of vertical height that I'm able to compost twice high and pick food from above the bins. It's just a lot of gardeners think only about that length and width, not the height. And obviously I've stumbled across the height thing and maximized it as much as I possibly could. So that's the vertical height stuff, and that's my compost bins. Now you're starting to see my garden, Daryl, and you'll start to understand then why there's a bit of compost required. So that photo shows the compost bins and obviously that wire rack. But the reason I'm showing you this photo is because normally my garden, or a garden, again, length and width, you'd only think about using the ground level of that space that's offered by the retaining wall. Gary went nuts and spent 2 or 3 weekends making this huge shelf along here. It doesn't hinder the light getting into the bottom garden, but I've doubled my growing space. I put in, 200 strawberry plants, 250 strawberry plants this year, and most of my strawberries are along the shelf. The timber, I think I actually brought that, but normally I use pallet wood, so most of the timber to build that's free. And the expensive bit with the bolts and the big planks I used, because as Agnes will attest, that you can basically park a bus up there, but I made it strong enough so that people can stand on it and not have any problem at all picking the raspberries that were above it. And that's what got me thinking in that initial diagram about the space going down, because those raspberries are obviously, I've gone vertical with those up there. I've built access so we can pick all the crops from that vertical height. And then I put the strawberries back there. I've actually probably then got, from this photo perspective, 3 layers of growing strata space, right? I've got the bottom garden, I've got the shelf area, and I take those off to stand on there to go and pick the raspberries on this side of my garden. Now, the clever bit for me is that shelf would never exist, and I'd never have that additional growing space in my backyard if I didn't think vertically about using the retaining wall in a better way. So there's a couple of photos in here of that shelf, right? It goes right round down there, and you can see that all the white pottles, all the black pots, it's all strawberries. Now, none of those would exist. I wouldn't have any space to do that at all if I hadn't thought vertically and used that vertical height well. And now I've got all that timber, I could probably go up again, but there's only so much you can do, and there's only so much you can tend to at the end of the day as well. But it's a good example. I like to put it out as quite a good example of using vertical height, because everyone would come along and just see the ground level. They'd see the next level up there where I'm growing food, but they'd never think about taking advantage of the retaining wall like this. And stop me, guys. If anyone wants to ask any questions, please feel free. It's only me rabbiting on.
I'm just amazed at the amount of produce that you've got there. How many people are you feeding?
An army. Possibly all of us. Yeah, I kind of went to excess with my garden, but I mean, to be honest, what you're also looking at, perhaps in the modern world, is currency. You're looking at tradability of food, for labor, for things that I can't supply myself, because there's only myself and my wife at home. So there is actually only 2 people, believe it or not, feeding off all of this. But the rest of it is next week's presentation about food storage. But in the world that we don't know what's ahead of us, right? Yes, I have an abundance of food, but that to me is currency, and it's also just a blessing to be able to give food away. And I'm happy to do that, So that's the extent of that great big shelf right round. I don't know how much more land area I've obtained to be able to grow, but it's obviously quite a bit, right? Because I wouldn't have had any other place to put all those strawberry plants this year. Those black pots before that I started with, In Australia, they get too hot. That was one of my learnings. So if you guys are making notes, it's worth buying some scungy, cheap well, there's no such thing because Bunnings charges such a fortune. Paint's like liquid gold. But anyway, it's worth painting the pots to keep the heat out of the soil. So the big tip from the first photograph that I showed you when they were black is that I went through this winter and painted every one of those pots. You can actually buy an etching material, so you can just paint on this etching material, let that dry, and then use any paint you like on the pots, and it will stick to the etching material. It's kind of embedded itself in the plastic. And the whole objective there... Yeah, go, please.
Oh, no, that's okay. I was just going to point out a little tip. Nearly every paint supplier has mistints, where they've done a paint for somebody and it hasn't turned out properly, and they seriously discount the mistints.
Okay, yeah.
But it pays to ask for them, because they don't necessarily, every mistint they sell means they might not sell the top quality one. So you just ask if they have any mistints they would like to get rid of, and you can have quarter even your paint price.
Okay, yeah, didn't know that. So there you go. Having just spent retail on all my painting pots, good on you. Well done. Thank you for that. Yeah. But the objective obviously is you've got to keep the heat out of the soil. So if yours are indeed on a veranda up high somewhere and they're just going to bake in the afternoon sun, paint them and protect them. And you'll see in some later photos in this series how I've gone and put more plastic in front of the pots to try and keep the heat out of all of my bean racks on the front of my house. But I just wanted to show you that's a bit of learning experience. Black pots, too hot. Plants don't like it. Try and keep the soil as cool as you can. Go and paint your pots. But again, in portable gardening, look how flexible I have. If these ever get in the way or I wanted to grow more in this area, I just wiggle them around a little bit, make room for another couple and bang them in, right? So portable gardening, I could have that ring of tomato plants there this year. I could double that and put the same pots down this pathway, and actually you'd walk to the clothesline, fight your way to the clothesline through nothing but tomato plants. So when I look at that photo, I see, yes, they're sitting on soil. I could also do that all the way down my concrete path at the back of my house, on the concrete against the brick wall, and tomato plants would grow just as happily there.
Gary, it's Kelly.
Yep.
I'm just wondering, what types of tomato plants are you growing? Because there's some really ridiculous ones that grow about 2 meters high. I'm just wondering what you do.
Okay, so part of my gardening experience, self-confession here, and Agnes will laugh at this, I haven't been really due diligent in storing my seeds very well. So I've got one bag called tomatoes, and I've got about 8 varieties in there, and they go in the ground, and what grows.
Okay, groovy.
Yeah, but those wire rack. Sorry.
I had a couple of Tommy Toe tomatoes, and I didn't give them enough space, and they went ballistic when we got a heap of rain. And they were just they probably didn't do so well, because then I was struggling to kind of stake them and provide them with a bit of structure. I didn't want to tell tomatoes how to grow, but it seems you have to.
Yeah, you do. But see, what you're looking at there, the top of that wire gauge, because I brought the roll of really wide stuff from Bunnings, so that's probably about 1.9 meters high. They're quite tall. Well, no, hang on. That's probably about 1.9. Yeah. So that, and that's all the structure. That's all the support that tomatoes, beans, peas, all those things that shoot up. That's all the support they need, right? So you just push them back and let the wire sort of encase them as they're growing up, and they're fully protected against the wind. So if you were up high and they did get a bit exposed, using this rather than stakes, they get tremendous support.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you.
That's all right, no problems. But yeah, just, from a mind's eye, here's a way that I could use width better, right? I could just put another row down there. I'm sure my wife would love that. And grow and double that growing space again. So let me just carry on. It's the same photos. It's, I don't know, beginning of summer for those, because those tomato plants are a bit better now. So does anyone, because I'm about to jump into another area of my garden, does anyone have any questions about the the strawberry shelf and what I've done with these pots and how I've configured them now? Okay.
No, I'm good.
Yep, cool. Next section, vertical gardening one, and there's actually quite a lot in this photo, right? I'll start with this back shelf here. This is what I call the mint, because those pots have all got mint in them. But they're up in the sky, because I built a shelf, and my actual mint is a row of pots down here and a row of pots up in the sky. You never put mint in the ground unless you want mint to grow absolutely everywhere. So lesson learnt. It took me 2 years to pull my mint out of my garden. And I only grow it in pots now. But again, right next to my compost bin, I've doubled the height of my growing space at this level here, and built a shelf above the bottom ones. So instead of 4 pots only down here, I've now got 8 pots of mint. And that means, like, I've got chocolate mint, lemon balm, normal mint. Agnes gave us some other mint the other day, so I'll be putting that into my mint. It's just what I call that area of my garden. But it's a vertical height approach, right? If I was only thinking width and length, I wouldn't have another shelf above. And in hindsight, with mint, I might have been able to get another shelf above it again as well, but it still probably might have been too high, especially when it grows up a little bit. Like this mint here is now entangled, that yin and yang mobile, so that no longer works because the mint's grown up. But as a concept in vertical gardening, I just want to show you, don't think just ground height, right? I put a shelf down there, I put another one above it, I've doubled what I'm getting out of my land area that I've consumed in growing mint. The structure in front, same again. Plastic pellets down on the ground, which you can get for free. And if you go looking for these ones, the guys that have got these just want to give them away because they can't be returned apparently. And they just, what do you do with plastic pellets? They're as strong as all get out. And I've never paid for any of my plastic pellets ever. But so this actually, there's a couple of photos of this a bit more committed in a couple of photos time, I think. This is actually my chemist shop. So this has been filled with herbs, because I'm growing herbs for a herbalist that wants them. And to just from a cost perspective, all of the main structural timber here is all free pellet wood. So I've pulled apart pellets and I've reused them, configured the way I want to. My costs in building this structure were the bolts to hold it together and those 4 planks on top, because I needed a lot of strength. I knew I was going to put a lot of weight up there. But you might look at that as a gardener and go, oh, you're starting to sacrifice some sunlight there because the shelf's right there. I've got turmeric growing in under here and it's just going gangbusters. It'll come up and over the top of that shelf, I'm sure. But again, I've doubled my growing area by thinking vertically. Because if I just put this pellets down, threw some pots on the pellet, you'd be done, right? That would be it. From a usable space perspective of using that width and length, that would be all I could do. But no, throw a shelf on top, vertical gardening thinking, how do I use the space above the garden? And I've doubled my growing space. So
sorry, Gary, where did you get those plastic pellets? You said you got them for free, but where from?
Well, you just drive around your industrial areas. In Canberra, we've got a place called Fishwick, and if you wanted to stop Canberra working, all you'd have to do is throw a couple of hand grenades at Fishwick, and Canberra would come to a grinding halt. So your main commercial sort of like, how you've got the shopping mall centres, and then in various big towns and things, you've got your sort of commercial suppliers perspective, where you'd find electrical wholesalers and plumbers and car mechanics. If you drive around there looking for some of your delivery businesses, you'll see stacks of pellets up. You just go in and ask, and if they go, no, you can't have them, well, you go and find the next guy. We've got a hydroponics shop in Canberra, and I get those plastic pellets from him. He buys a couple of imported products that come, with a huge pellet load on them. And when customers buy them off the pellets, of course, what do I do with my pellets? So I go down there with my trailer and pick them up on a regular basis and give them away to all my friends, which is only about 2 people. So they've got a lot of plastic pellets as well. But taking the lame attempt at humour out of there, what you're looking at is basically, it's not free because the bolts are quite expensive and those planks aren't absolutely cheap. But from a vertical height perspective, it was the best way I could figure out to double that growing space, because obviously I've completely mirrored the footprint of those plastic pallets with that shelving. So again, just, it's kind of common sense when you see it, but it's really hard to keep your mind's eye on, okay, how could I take advantage of that vertical space? Now, if I really went for it, you know, I could hang pots off these things up here. I put these in so I can wrap this up in winter and protect all of the herbs from the winter frosts. But if I really went nuts and just hung a couple of strawberry plants off there, I'd actually, again, have 3 levels of growing off that one structure. So the purpose of tonight's presentation for me was, you know, just try and help open your mindset up to thinking about gardening in that vertical way, right? Couple more photos, yeah. Just, and there you go. You know, you can point at me. Hey, you haven't finished painting those? No, but I painted, I don't know, 200 pots during winter, and those ones missed out. But that's what it starts to look like when it starts to get a bit more, you know, propagated with plants. And you know, obviously it's testament. Well, I've stuff down below, stuff on top, and nothing's really suffering from lack of sunlight at the moment. I've just got to remember to keep watering under that shelf. And like the turmeric just loves it there. It's in full sun down the bottom there in the afternoon sun. So the turmeric just loves it. Yeah, just a few photos as I was building it. That's when it starts to look a bit more populated in that area, right? This is early this summer. And my embarrassing black pots have all been moved off there, and I put all my coloured ones up there. So there's, I don't know, 16, 18 different types of herbs growing on that shelf alone. And then I've got other herbs growing down here. That's what these pots are that you can see. And it starts to really maximise that length and width thing again, right? That's kind of my gardening workbench in my backyard, but it got consumed this year by chilies and peppers and other things. So you might see a photo of that as well. But vertical height growing, pretty cool. Sorry.
So what are the white tubs? What are the white tubs at the front there?
Oh, they're what. So last week's presentation was on wicking bed gardening. Those are 2 halves of a wicking bed that I've cut in half and just haven't used yet. So it was just a place to tuck them away out of the way. Yeah, there's nothing more than that with those. I when I'm moving around soil and things like that on my garden, because you can see how fully I have maximized the space on my property for growing food, I fill those up with soil and they become my sort of reservoir of soil and sand. So, you know, they're overflow from last week's wicking bed presentation where I showed everyone how to build these things. These are the wicking beds here. And I've just ended up with one that, you know, was available that I didn't use really. So let me just jump in. Okay, so that's the end of the back of my property. I'll take you to the front of my property because maximizing growing space like this wasn't enough for me. I'm a little extreme sometimes. I started looking at my front yard. So hang on, before I go on, is there any questions up till now? Okay, I'll jump on then. This is the front of my house. It faces west. Those bricks turn into a sun-baked night store and pump the heat into my house during summer because full afternoon sun facing west just sucks. And I was looking at all that energy. I didn't really want to destroy my front lawn just to try and keep it a little normal out the front of my property. So I came up with these bean racks, and you've seen the famous wire plastic thing that Gary likes to use. This is exactly the same. But what I've done is I've built up, obviously using, I think this is 25 mil plastic pipe. I've built these bean racks that pull apart in about 10 minutes. Literally, I take them down every winter. And I just haven't glued here and here and at the top and the bottom so that actually breaks in half in its length. That half there moves away and you end up with 2 separate sections, and then they can easily go up next to a fence and be stored during winter. I've tied them to the top of the gutter so the gutter supports. I just used a little bit of light wire there to hold them to the house. And, oops, out of order, sorry. That one was out of order. So what am I going to do now? Let me just see if I can go to those photos so I can continue doing the same thing for you. Yeah, that one was just out of order, sorry. So that's what it looks like when, it's naked and I've just put it in and installed it in the beginning of summer. It's tent pegged to the ground. You can see the bottom rail there has got tent pegs over it. So I've got support at the top and bottom. And this is what I do with this area. So that's what they look like leaning up against the house with nothing growing on them. Painting the pots during winter, vital. And now you'll see that I've used some other material I just bought from a recycling shop, because these pots sit behind that, so that whilst they're painted, they've also got another layer of light protection to stop the sunlight striking the soil and the pot as much as well. But I'll show you how good this goes, right? So I put basically 4 bean racks at the front of my house, and I'm losing friends at the moment. I'm trying to give away so many beans that everyone's sick of me. There's just a few photos of painting the pots. That's what it looks like when you've got paint. When you've got painted pots, they're protected by that sun shield. They're now starting to come up that rack. This is all portable gardening, of course, as well. I can move these wherever I like, and I can move these racks wherever I like, right? But the massive advantage with this is I'm not destroying my front lawn, turning it into permanent garden. But growing beans up these racks keeps all the heat off the house. Turns all that heat energy that would have just transmitted it away into my lounge and my bedroom, and turn it into a growing space. So as that comes on during summer, that whole area shades my west wall of my house by using vertical growing in a portable way. It's just magnificent. And like I've actually got one of the courier drivers in the local area now. He loves delivering to me because I've told him he can pick beans off my bean rack when he comes. And it's just nice to bless people with the excess. Yeah, that's kind of the end of the front of my property ones. But those bean racks like that in a portable way, you could do that and use that on a veranda as well. You'd obviously have to be careful that it didn't sort of fall off and go down a couple of stories. You need to secure it well. But if you're in a situation where you want to grow something and keep, use the heat energy and keep some of the heat off your home, here's a brilliant way of turning, here's a reasonable way of turning that into an opportunity to grow food. And if they were wicking beds, they'd leak. There'd be no staining on the finished material, like on the concrete or whatever, because the water would stay inside and wick up through the soil, right? So it'd be really, really clean as well on a landlord's property.
Can I come in again?
There you go. I'll go and find the other pictures that I just did off.
I'm kind of listening, so I hope I'm not covering anything, but what Gary does with those, of course, is they're fully take apartable. So in winter, when you want that front wall clear, of course, the beans are finished, and you just pull all the rack apart and put it all away until next year, and you bring it all out again. So it's kind of completely transportable, portable type of thing.
Yeah. And the beans really struggle, as you can tell, right? I took this a couple of days ago in the hot time, which is why some of those leaves do look a bit withered. But look at the shade protection it's giving my house, and look at the heat energy that's now being used to grow food. It's huge, right? I took these a couple of years ago. This was last year or the year before, but just to give an idea of, you're literally pulling food out of thin air because you're using that vertical space. I think there's a couple here. See, that's getting a bit heat tied. I just took those to add some volume. But from a sun protection perspective, it completely shields the house. And I just take it down. It takes me, I think last year I actually timed it. It was like 18 minutes to pull both of them down and put them away. Ridiculously fast. And, close up of growing beans in a vertical space where you wouldn't think you could grow. And yeah, there's the pot fully committed and all the shading. Yep.
Gary, it's Chris.
Yep.
With your pots and the soil that's in them, Do
Yep.
you change that like with your peas or beans? Do you change that every season?
Yeah, because
And what do
beans are.
you do with your soil? Do you recycle it or
Yeah, well, now you're starting to go full circle. If you were here earlier about why I've got so many compost bins and things, so I'm recycling all the soil as well. Beans
yeah?
fix nitrogen, so you don't want to be putting beans into really strong soil. Beans actually like a little bit of lime sprinkled over the soil. They go nuts with a bit of lime. But
Okay.
you're right, the soil in there is a single use. I dig them out during winter because, not a lot's happening in your garden in winter. Well, here's indoor-y type things or undercover type things you can do. When I pull the bean racks down, I use my little blue hand trolley. I come out and take all of those out to my backyard, and I refresh the soil in them every year and wheel them back out next year.
Okay. You might cover this later. I'm not sure where you're going.
Yep.
Potatoes. Do you have you grown any potatoes?
Yeah, I can talk about that, but it's not vertical gardening. But I'll find you a couple of photos of my potato area. But I didn't really include it in here, but remind me and I'll show you a couple of photos of my potato growing area. I get about an obscene amount, actually. I probably got 60 or 80 kilos of potatoes last year out of my little property, but they are on the ground. So I didn't have that as vertical gardening inclusion, but I've got some photos. I can show you the way I do that. And it's old fashioned. Our parents used to grow food when we were growing up in New Zealand. I just copied what they used. Well, my memory of when I was a kid and how we used to grow that food in New Zealand, I just copied it. Stayed in my head.
Okay. Something I've never tried, but my father told me about was using like a 44-gallon drum. So they're actually quite tall, and
layering it up. Yeah.
Put cow manure in the bottom. Put your seed plants in the bottom, potato, and as they grow, you keep topping it up.
Yep.
So you use the whole lot as reducing your.
Give it a go. Give it a go. I've done it with using car tires, but then the new car tires are so toxic that apparently all the chemicals just leach out and go to the soil. It works, but I don't know. I just committed horizontally at that point. I used length and width only and just grew them on the deck. I prepared the ground first, but maybe one day I'll get out and try and use a 44-gallon drum. Car tires, no, because of all the chemicals. So maybe a 44-gallon drum's a better way to go. You'd have to keep the heat out of it, that's all, because the metal is going to bake your soil. So you'd have to make sure the thing's in shade.
Yep.
Because you can see the length I've gone to here to keep the heat out of the soil, right? Yes. And I've painted every pot and protected.
Yeah.
Yep. And still they wilt every day because the soil is not in the ground.
Yeah.
So let me just jump back here. I apologize. I thought I had this all in perfect order until I go to present it, and then nothing happens the way I expect it to. When I was doing all of the IBCs, the wicking beds that I explained last week, I ended up with a weird space in my garden because I didn't sort of sat down and map all this. This has all sort of happened just organically, and I ended up with a sort of like a strange shaped free space, for want of a better word. And I thought vertically about, okay, what am I going to do with that? So this is the answer I came up with. This is called my strawberry tower, which is obviously just shelves for growing whatever I like on top of this thing. But again, if I'd only thought length and width on the ground, I'd only have a single level of growing, right? I made this so that you can actually step inside there and stand there and just spin around and eat strawberries. There's about 4 or 5 different species of strawberries in there, and the strasberries are just to die for. Debbie, my wife, and I fight over finding strasberries. They're just gorgeous. But vertical gardening subject matter, if I come back to that, here's another way of using vertical space. I've put shelving on the inside. I put shelving on the outside. So I've, at every level, I've thought width and length as well, and built 3 shelves of more growing space where I'd only ever really used the growing medium on the ground if I'd stayed with length and width. what you're seeing in here also is I built this to store water in that great big pipe. I've also braced this area up here, and one day I'll go and buy a big water tank, because my view for this is to fill up a water tank which will feed that pipe. And I've already got the fittings to drill holes in that pipe and drip feed all the strawberry plants. So I come out once a day, fill up the water tank, and let it drip the water down through for the next couple of hours. But the reason I think this is a good thing to show you guys, obviously, is taking opportunity of that vertical space above the garden. And in hindsight, I probably should have grown something down right at ground level, but I covered all of that over with stones and sort of just said, well, that was enough for that area in my garden. And I did its most expensive way. This cost me a lot of money because all of that piping was brand new. I got it from a metal supplier. I would advocate going to a second-hand scaffolding company and seeing what they're throwing out, because stuff is worn out, and you'd save a lot of, well, you can't save money by spending money. You'd spend a lot less money, even, go back to the national currency of Australia and swap a few slabs of beer or something with a local scaffolding company, and go grab their scaffolding poles, and you can build any shape you like out of that stuff, as you can clearly see here. But vertical gardening, who knew, and this could be flowers, this could be all manner of herbs, spring onions, whatever I wanted. Beetroot, I could grow beetroot on all those shelves if I really wanted to. It's just, again, maximizing that vertical area and taking full advantage, right? So there's a few detailed photos of what I've done there. I've just tried to protect people as they're going in, took all the horns off all the timber. I've stained all the timber to keep the water out. Galvanized shelf racks screwed through the galvanized pole. Giddy up. It doesn't move. It's really well braced. It's never going to fall down. And I've got, 1, 2, 3, so that's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 shelves of growing space. It's huge, right? What I could just even do and grow in that area there is huge. It's just by using the vertical height well. Yeah. And Alan, my brother there, he makes the signs for me, so we've named everything as we've gone along just to make the gardening a bit more interesting as well. But just gives you an idea of what you can do, because that was a really weird shaped space area that I sort of got left over, and thought about it for a couple of weeks and thought about how I could best use it. And that's kind of what it looks like when it's pumping out strawberries and everything's going well. Yeah, that's, fairly current photos. Back to the bean racks, that's okay. We'll just carry on through this lot. I actually took this photo because the solar lights were failing and I wanted to return them, but I'm using it right now because this is inside my back garden with these steel poles that are holding up all that bird mesh, obviously. I've then gone down and brought these wire frames, and I'm going to bolt those right round through my garden, because that's going to become my vertical growing space for growing passion fruit. Now, I've got a lot of garden down here in those wicking beds and the IBC containers, and that's all great. But I'm taking even more advantage of the vertical height by putting those wire racks up there. And I'm just going to grow the passion fruit out of pots and let them come up through there. So you'll be able to walk down this sort of main road of my garden, reach up and pick passion fruit from the sky, basically. Again, just by thinking vertically. If I didn't have that concept in my head, I would have just stopped down here where this blue sign is, which tells my wife what's in that particular wicking bed, and that would have been my lot, right? But now I'm growing vertically. I'm taking advantage of all of that vertical space above that garden. And next year, if anyone will hold me to account, I'll come back and show you those things fully engaged in passion fruit. The last few photos are just my fence line, but there's a few things in here I wanted to show you people. I've put chicken wire meshing down that fence. In hindsight, I probably wouldn't have done that. I probably would have used star pickets and then the chicken wire to keep the load of all of the berries that are growing at my place off the fence. But the fence is there, and I paid for new fences around my property. And so how do I use the vertical height that the fence offers me? Now, I got away with it this year. I got to say I was quite lucky, because growing up next to a fence that's got the Colorbond steel like that often bakes the plant because the fence gets too hot. But this summer's been really weird and strange, as we started talking before we even started presenting, right? That summer hasn't been that hot. So all these berries and things you can see here actually just exploded onto the fence. And I only had that fence installed this last winter, or the one before. And now that whole vertical, so that fence runs 30 meters, the whole length of my property. That's all food, and it's all taking use of the vertical space. So out of a small area, perhaps where you wouldn't think to grow, food, I try and take full advantage of it. And these photos here will show you that. That's a water pipe, so that's all on a timed sprinkler water system. Set and forget the whole lot. And as Agnes will attest to, because she comes here quite a bit, that fence, you can hardly even see it anymore. It's just choking with food. Because in that photo there's, what is there? Potatoes, blueberries, more blueberries. Those are black currants. That's a different type of berry, which I still actually haven't figured out what that one actually is, because I brought it and ripped the labels off and lost the labels. But, there's potatoes there. So, and there's rosemary in that photo as well. So I'm maximizing that entire area, but I'm really maximizing it by using the vertical space that the fence offered me. And this gives you an idea of how abundant stuff is, right? And I've included this for a couple of reasons. That's just thornless blackberries, but where's the fence gone? Because I've just maximized the fence. And you can see the amount of blackberries that are hanging off that. I can even zoom in a little bit, I think, here, and just show you how healthy things can be, right? Look at it. It's just going nuts. Just using the vertical space. We've just been away for the weekend, so we've actually yet to go out there and harvest all of these blackberries again and again and again, because we get multiple crops off them. But the other reason I've included this photo is, see this plank here? If you listen to the IBC presentation I did last week, I showed you how to make IBCs and use a timber frame on top of the IBC for support of the IBC itself. That plank is suspended in thin air, screwed to the timber frame of two IBCs. So there's an IBC down here. If you guys can see my mouse, yes, you can. There's an IBC down there that plank is resting on, and there's another one up here that plank is resting on. And last summer, I fully committed all of these horizontal planks that are basically sitting in thin air to more and more pots of food. Again, I've sort of gone overboard with my garden. But the reason I think it's important to show you is because I've got pathways and things where that chair is sitting, and you'd walk up there and go to that IBC, or you'd walk up there and go to that IBC. In this instance, this summer, you walk up there and pick blackberries. Well, last year, the blackberries didn't take off the same way. I had all of that shelf committed to food in pots. And it's all above the ground, not where the blackberries are growing, in thin air, suspended by the great big plank. I've doubled my growing space again, because obviously the garden below is one level, the garden above is the next. So just thinking vertically, there is a pot sitting on the end of that same plank, and that's the way I've mounted it onto the top of the IBC. And it's a great big solid plank, obviously, but it can take all the weight that I could ever put on it. And I've doubled my growing space because I've thought vertically. I think I've included a couple of these to show you that too. Oh, there's some more wire frames, look, that they're going to be strung up during this winter for the sporting of that passion fruit vine. But there you go. That's why I've included that one as well. See, there's pots sitting behind the IBC, supported by another big plank. I'm doubled my growing space again. It's just getting away from thinking length and width and thinking length, width, and height. That's the side wall of my property. That's that great big 30-meter fence. All of that growth really has happened this year. you will not see that fence probably out that side ever again. And we've been giving away kilos of berries this year, even from this growth. Next year, we are going to be swimming in berries by using the vertical space that the new fencing provided me. Because this used to be Pittosporum hedge, which was a complete waste of time. I got all those ripped out when I got the fence installed. And wire meshed that, and now all of that height is food. Back to the bean racks, that's fine. So we're almost done, folks, but I just wanted to sort of try and help people think, oh, well, there's another photograph there, look. Again, I got lazy this year. I didn't really commit the whole garden to growing food as much as I normally would. But that's another classic example of using another plank between two IBCs. So the walking path is up here to this point here, and there's a walking path there, and that's an IBC there. So the back area was never really going to be used, and I sort of looked at it from a vertical perspective and went, I know, I can just throw a plank across that and I can cover those in pots. I've got white sage growing up there, and those this year I think are a couple of lily plants, or maybe even flowers. It looks like flowers in there. But from a concept of using the vertical space, right, I don't have any issue now looking at an area and go, how can I use that in a three-dimensional way, length, width, and height, and really thinking about that. And that's just another area of my garden. We just filled it with garden gnomes and things to make it interesting for kids should they ever get here. But that's the mounting system between IBCs, big thick plank. You can throw anything you like on that, and you've maximized your growing space. So let me just check my thumbnails and I'll see whether I've actually talked to everything. Because I think I'm done. Just a second. View thumbnails. I'll just see if there's any other photos in here I haven't shown you guys. But I'm hoping it's helpful, right? Just to show you what you can think of if you're thinking vertically. Yeah, that's all those photos, but just let me drop out of here for a second. So has anyone got any questions? Because from a vertical growing perspective, this was a big enough topic for me to cut it and make it another presentation, because it turned, the other two presentations are a good hour long, and then to bolt this one on as well was going to be quite a bit of, you know, one of the presentations was going to be far too long. So hence why I broke it out and split it up a little bit. I'll see if there's any. So has anyone got any questions of me, or has everyone gone to sleep and got bored?
I'm here. It's just a little overwhelming. That's what a fabulous job you've done.
Yeah, this is what I was showing people last week, which was the IBC gardening. All I'm doing through here is looking for my potato photos. That's my bottom garden. That's my top garden. There's strawberry towers down that end. Yeah, I don't think I've got any photos ready here of the strawberry patches. Sorry, potatoes. That shows the herb rack. See the shelf there supporting those pots? That's all braced, galvanized scaffolding pole shelving. But I don't think I've got a photo of my potato area in here, unfortunately. But I grow potatoes on the ground. I've got 3 troughs of potatoes, just the way I think the Irish grow theirs, just on the deck and in formed molded lines. Total distance of mine would probably be about, I don't know, 20 odd meters. And every year I get, you know, I don't know, 60, 80 kilos of potatoes out of that area. But they are one crop that I've kept on the ground, just because I think it's more of a childhood memory than anything else, really. I'll just see if I've got any photos of that area in this area here, because I don't know that I've taken a photo of my potato. My road sign says the potato patch, so if I can get close to that, I'll know. Yeah, no, I don't think I have got any. So no, the potatoes I haven't got sophisticated with. I've left them on the deck. So that's where I've only thought about width and length, not height. But folks, that kind of concludes what I wanted to show you in vertical gardening, right? I just want to sort of maybe help you thinking about space that you might be looking at to grow food in, and using it in a perhaps a denser way, I suppose, would be a way of saying it. Getting more out of the same land area by thinking vertically. So I hope that's helped. Anyone got any questions before I turn the recordings off? Or have I bored you all to tears now?
Gary, it's been really inspiring. Thank you so much. I've got lots and lots of ideas now, and I'm pumped. Thank you so much.
That's right. And feel free to circle back. I'm happy to share everything with everybody who's interested, right?
Brilliant. You're in Canberra way?
Yeah, I am. Yep.
Excellent. Good. I'm in Newcastle.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks a lot.
That's good. So, yeah. So, this video will end up, well, very quickly now. It is now becoming